Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today for what I know is going to be a really interesting conversation about the U.S. Cyber Solarium Commission and the 117th Congress. I know we all wish we could be together in California, but our present circumstances and the past year really illustrate and underscore the critical importance of cybersecurity and information security issues. I'm Susan Hennessy. I'm the executive editor of Lawfare and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. I'm very honored to be joined today by Congressman Mike Gallagher and Congressman Jim Langevin, who are co-chair and member of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Both of these members need no introduction, and in the interest of our very limited time and that reality, I'm actually going to dive right into questions. Congressman Gallagher, I'd like to start with you to talk a little bit about the background of the commission and really how we got here. I think initially a lot of people in Washington had a little bit of skepticism about the commission approach. Generally, commissions are often where you put really hard problems to die and bury them under process. And you did something sort of unusual, and that's that you put out a really thoughtful set of recommendations, and astonishingly enough, Congress actually passed some of them into law. And so I'm sort of interested to hear, what was your initial approach to the commission's work, and what was the process and really sort of the goal when you first set out?
Well, the dirty secret is we had a superpower on our commission, and that was my colleague, Jim Langevin, who's been paying attention to these issues far longer than I have, and probably pays more attention to them than any other member of Congress, and was instrumental in us being successful. But after the establishment of the commission in the 2019 NDAA and the population of the commissioners and the co-chairs, we really took a look at it and thought, yeah, there's a lot of these outside commissions that do good work. They write very thoughtful reports, but a lot of times these reports just sit on shelves and they collect dust. And so we also looked at the makeup of the commission with 4 sitting legislators, an independent from Maine, Angus King, my co-chair, Jim, Democrat, myself, a Republican Senator Ben Sasse. And we thought, well, this is unique in that it is a congressionally driven exercise. And so we should take advantage of Congress's unique strengths. We had great participation from the executive branch. We had phenomenal outside experts like Chris Inglis and Suzanne Spalding, Sam Ravitch, a lot of others. But with Congress sort of being the institution that gave life to the commission, with 4 members of Congress on the commission, well, we should write a report that's really a blueprint for legislative action. And so if you look at the final report, not only are we trying to sound the alarm in terms of the challenge we're facing in cyberspace, and a lot of times we sort of thought of this as being the 9/11 Commission without the 9/11, trying to warn America and the interagency so that we can avoid the crisis. You'll not only see that warning and an attempt to sort of convey the stakes to the American people, you'll see recommendations that were geared towards being put into being implemented right away. And in any case where we're saying Congress should do X, Y, or Z, we then also took the trouble to draft the legislative language. And I'm proud to say we got about 25 of our recommendations effectuated into law with last year's NDAA. We got a lot of work yet to be done. But when you boil it down, I think we're arguing for, it's a call to arms for a whole of nation approach. We believe deterrence, some form of deterrence, is possible in cyberspace. It involves denying benefits to our adversaries by expanding public-private collaboration, building resilience. And finally, it involves imposing costs against malign actors by maintaining the capability, capacity, and credibility required to retaliate against those who attack our interests in cyberspace. So we've been very pleased with the results so far, but again, a long way to go. And we're going to continue that fundamental approach, which is that this is a mechanism for action, not just a sort of a debating society in which Jim and I get to talk to each other a lot.
So Congressman Langevin, the commission report, I think, came out in March 2020. So we're sort of right past the 1-year anniversary. A lot has happened between then and now. Sort of what is your accounting of the successes of the commission and the report, and where are the areas where you think that there's additional work that needs to be done, and the work that's going to be driving the commission's agenda and legislative priorities sort of moving forward?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say a few words about our two co-chairs. First of all, I thank Mike for the kind words about me, but the truth of the matter is we had 2 rock star co-chairs with my colleague, Congressman Mike Gallagher and Senator Angus King. Certainly proud to serve on there also with Senator Ben Sass. But then all of the incredible talent that we had, both in the executive branch and the private sector, including Chris Inglis and Suzanne Spalding. Chris was the deputy director of the NSA first, now to be nominated as our national cyber director, and then Suzanne Spalding, of course, who was the former director of what is now CISA. Because we had Dr. Samantha Ravitch, Tom Fanning. I could just go on the list. Just an outstanding commission. I should have mentioned everybody, but I also wanted to mention our executive director, retired Admiral Mark Montgomery, who from the outset was determined that we were going to keep this process moving along, and the incredible rock star staff that we had. So again, wonderful team to work with. So in terms of what we've accomplished, one of the most important recommendation, something I've been working on for more than a decade, is to create a national cyber director, a position that is Senate confirmed in the executive office of the president. As I mentioned, Chris Inglis is nominated now as the first ever national cyber director, and he's awaiting confirmation as we speak. But the one thing that had been missing in all of our strategy and all of our efforts was a quarterback on the field, someone that had both policy and budgetary authority to reach across government and compel departments and agencies to do their part, to do more on cybersecurity. And we now have that quarterback in Chris Inglis. Beyond that, we also were very successful. So we had, there were 80 recommendations that came out of our final report. 55 were turned into legislative proposals, and we got about 27 of those enacted into law through the National Defense Authorization Act, where I serve as a chair of a subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee. And in addition to the National Cyber Director, we had provisions in there to strengthen the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, creating a joint cyber planning office at CISA, giving CISA now administrative subpoena authority, and allowing CISA also to do proactive threat hunting on other government networks. A lot of people didn't realize that CISA in the past could only do threat hunting on other government networks if they were invited in. And we know what happened in that case. Departments and agencies don't want to look bad, because if they invite CISA and they find something, it doesn't make them look good potentially. And so consequently, CISA was never invited in. Well, that has all changed. Now CISA can do threat hunting on other government networks, and they're going to be much more proactive. Also working closely with critical infrastructure, codifying the sector risk management agency. So we delineate responsibilities, and also the continuity of economy planning is another aspect that got enacted. So this is something that Dr. Ravitch was really championing on our efforts. So those are some of just the highlights. In terms of what our next steps, again, there's still more work to be done, and we're ready to go again for round two in terms of legislation. Setting up systemically important critical infrastructure designation that would identify those areas of critical infrastructure that are just too important to fail. And so we want to have basically a new social contract with this entity, what we call SICI, for lack of a better acronym, but systemically important critical infrastructure. So a new social contract. There would have to be more aid and information sharing from government, but also there would have to be continuous monitoring on these critical networks for critical infrastructure. All of these things are really important. We also want to establish and create the joint collaborative environment. So we have both real-time information sharing and collaboration between critical infrastructure and the government. And that's something that is really lacking right now. The last thing I want to say is we also need to create a Bureau of Cyber Statistics, so that we can quantify what's working and what's not in cyberspace. Right now, we don't have that what is working, what's in terms of the data, and what's not. We think we know. A lot of times we should, even CISOs will shoot from the hip. we need to really quantify that so that even CISOs can make the business case to their CEOs or CIOs or the board. And then the last thing I'll mention is we need to create an ambassador rank position at the State Department with a bureau underneath that ambassador, so that we're leading more proactively on the international front. That's another area that's lacking right now. But I could go on for a while, but those are some of the highlights.
So I think parts of your answer referenced a little bit what has occurred over the past year, and I think really the SolarWinds breach being the most consequential. And sort of this has emerged a little bit as sort of a Rorschach hack, where everybody looks at it and sees confirmation of their priors. We've got people sort of arguing, well, this illustrates the failures of our current cybersecurity posture and why Defend Forward doesn't work. We have simultaneously other people arguing, this shows the need to double down on the current strategy and sort of do more of it. And Congressman Gallagher, I'll direct this to you initially. When you look at SolarWinds in particular, sort of what is your big takeaway about what this means and what this says for U.S. cybersecurity strategy and posture?
Well, I think it is notable that a lot of the warning we got about it, or at least the initial detection, was from FireEye. So it wasn't from a U.S. government entity; it was from the private sector. And I think that is a reminder of the need to relentlessly push on public-private collaboration, and for the federal government to have the humility to recognize that it needs the cooperation of the private sector, particularly when over 80% of the critical infrastructure in cyberspace is controlled by the private sector. That's essential. And I think if you read our report, you'll see a good faith effort not to adopt a very top-down, one-size-fits-all, onerous regulatory approach where NSA or DOD or CISA is saying, you private sector must give us XYZ information, or you must do things a certain way, but rather an attempt to have a more collaborative partnership to get the incentives right. And also for the federal government to take a look at itself, as it needs to do in the wake of SolarWinds, and have an honest conversation about where it went wrong. I know a lot of commentators have pointed out these hacks as examples of the failure of Defend Forward, for example, but that's not totally accurate, right? I mean, Defend Forward posits that U.S. cyber forces should maneuver into what's called red and gray space, or adversary controlled and third-party controlled cyberspace, to learn about how adversaries operate, and then when authorized, conduct cyber effects operations. But in both of the cases recently, adversaries took advantage of blind spots in blue space where the military appropriately does not operate. And so what the attacks teach us is that the U.S. needs to get a more complete understanding of the threat environment, which will require fusing insight from across blue, gray, and red space to enable, among other things, Defend Forward to be more effective at anticipating and thwarting malicious activity when it happens outside of the U.S., for example. All the things that Congressman Langevin talked about, the Joint Collaborative Environment, the Bureau of Cyber Statistics, are geared towards that. And the other thing I think we really need to monitor, particularly when it comes to SolarWinds, is we feel very strongly, Jim mentioned it, but we feel strongly that something like giving CISA threat hunting authority on .gov networks, really empowering the incident response teams they have at CISA, would have made a difference, perhaps not prevented the attack, but perhaps allowed us to detect it, the hack rather, and allowed us to detect it quicker. We need to monitor the executive branch over the next year or 2 years to see if the authorities and resources we are giving them are actually having the effect we think they're going to have. And that really, we want the commission going forward to be interactive with the executive branch to figure out if kind of we hit the mark on certain recommendations or if we missed the mark on others.
So Congressman Langevin, there clearly is an ongoing sort of incident response within the U.S. government right now. And there sort of continues to be this question about the external response. The breach has been publicly attributed to Russia, but I think there's still a lot of disagreement about how to respond and really how to even understand what happened. And for somebody like yourself who's been in this space for a really long time and thought a lot about sort of breaches as they've evolved over time, how should we even understand what happened? Do you view this as conventional espionage? And so whenever we should think about sort of the response options available, it really is sort of, the moderate tools that are typical of that context, or whenever you look at SolarWinds, do you say, no, this is something different. This is something that crosses a normative line and demands some more aggressive response?
Well, in a lot of ways, this is something that it's going to be incumbent upon the administration to give us that answer. Certainly, there's a lot of elements here that look like traditional espionage, but it was the worst U.S. Cyber intrusion in U.S. history in terms of what they did in terms of getting on our networks. But it's really going to be up to the administration to delineate between whether this was broader than traditional espionage or is it traditional espionage? Because we do run the risk of blowback from other entities and saying that if they see our activities or allies' activities as very similar, what is the difference between this, say, and of course NotPetya? Now there was a big difference, and we have to make that delineation. I mean, NotPetya was clearly a cyber attack. This was a cyber intrusion in terms of SolarWinds, and now delineating it in terms of how much damage was done and did it cross a line. That really is going to be up to the administration to answer that question. But if we don't do that delineation, does it disincentivize Russia from conducting, say, SolarWinds versus a NotPetya attack? And it also could put U.S. operatives at risk too. That's something else that I'm worried about in terms of blowback. So we're going to have to be very careful about how we did this. There's no doubt SolarWinds is a very damaging cyber intrusion, but now we've got to make clear what the difference is and what our response will be.
Congressman Langevin, I want to stick with you for a moment just to return to something that you said earlier about the National Cyber Director and President Biden's intent to nominate Chris Inglis, the former Deputy Director of NSA, my former boss as well. And I'm curious, are you satisfied that nominating someone of that stature really fulfills your vision for what this position is in practice? Or do you think that the National Cyber Director is ultimately going to need additional legal authorities to be effective and empowered? Is this a necessary but not sufficient condition, or has your vision really been fulfilled?
So I'm absolutely thrilled with Chris Inglis being nominated as the first cyber director. It's a Senate confirmed position, the executive office of the president. Chris is a real thought leader on cyber policy, and he understands both cyber offense and cyber defense, and he's going to know how to really balance equities. He will focus obviously on the defense side, but right now, up until this point, we didn't have anybody within the executive office of the president that had that policy and budgetary authority. Right now, where the arbiter is and was the Office of Management and Budget, and cybersecurity is not the OMB's primary mission or focus. Now you're going to have somebody in Chris Inglis that will be reviewing departments and agency budgets and can make recommendations directly to the president and directly to OMB to better protect our networks in cyberspace. So we close off those vulnerabilities where they're glaring, and we didn't have that before. So the Office of National Cyber Director, of course, is really just focused on cybersecurity, and that's what we really needed. Someone that's going to be that wake up every day going to work, and that is his mission. And I have great confidence in Chris to be able to do that job effectively.
So Congressman Gallagher, the conversation about the National Cyber Director, I think, is taking place in the context of a fight that's pretty familiar at the dawn of each new presidential administration, as various agencies jockey for position within domestic cyber incident response, in particular where there's a foreign state actor as a threat actor. The White House, DHS, NSA, this new NCD office, the FBI, a lot of people have a dog in this fight in terms of the piece that they feel responsible for, and relatedly what legal authorities and funding they are entitled to in order to execute their mission. And holistically, what is your view for what a structure for incident response should look like? Are there too many cooks in the kitchen? You've now spent over 2 years really examining this question, and sort of what are your views about who should be in charge of what?
Well, at first, if I could just dovetail off what Congressman Langevin said, I do think, if the old rule of bureaucratic politics is where you stand depends on where you sit, I understand, the reluctance of those in the executive branch to have Congress foist, an alternative structure upon them. But I can tell you that there was just a lot of thought that went into this. And I do think in the early going of the National Cyber Director, so much is going to be dependent on the personalities involved. And I think we're very lucky in Chris to have someone, obviously who's deeply knowledgeable, high energy, but low ego, who can work very well with Ann Neuberger and with Jen Easterly and others. And I just think the personalities are right to make it work. And I think Congress stands ready to engage the administration in a conversation about further resources and authorities. As to your direct question, the National Cyber Director is intended to act as a central coordinator for U.S. government incident response or any inherently defensive action the government takes to secure cyberspace. So I don't expect any major changes in the authorities and responsibilities of, for example, CISA or the FBI, the two primary agencies involved in incident response. But I expect the USG, I expect the government to continue to use the cyber response group for day-to-day activities and to use the unified coordination group to respond to crises. These groups serve as primary coordinating bodies for cyber incidents. I think it's fair to say they would benefit from even heavier involvement from the private sector, which, as recent events have shown, are indispensable partners in large-scale incident response. And then more long-term, I think the National Cyber Director will be critical in ensuring greater coordination, planning, and information sharing across federal agencies so that we can more quickly detect cyber incidents and we're better prepared to respond to them when they arise.
So I think we have time to squeeze in a final question if I can, and I'll pose it to you, Congressman Langevin, and that's that, for the past 5 years, really election security, I think, has been at the top of the agenda. It's consumed a lot of attention in the national debate. With the 2020 election behind us now, I think there's a little bit of a tendency of the public and public attention and also legislative attention, which is a finite resource, to shift to other priority areas, including other priority areas in cyberspace, including the very long list that we've discussed just in this conversation thus far. That said, the work of election security is very much unfinished. And so, to your mind, sort of what are the next steps for election security, and what are sort of the legislative priorities and efforts that we might anticipate seeing in that space in the 117th Congress?
Sure. Well, my clear message on that point is don't take our eye off the ball. Yes, we had the most secure elections in U.S. history. I agree with Chris Krebs when he made that statement, and it's because of a lot of work, a whole of government, whole of nation approach, working with state and local governments and elected officials, making sure that we had secure elections. But it doesn't mean that we can stop defending our elections going forward, because our adversaries, our enemies who would like to sow doubt or undermine confidence in our elections are still out there, and they're going to be at it again, I'm sure. So we need a sustained investment on the part of the federal government to lock in our gains. And that means more support for strong, up-to-date, modern election equipment. It means paper ballots. It means risk limiting audits. It means attention to non-voting systems like voter registration systems as well. That's somewhere else that our enemies and adversaries would love to be able to sow doubt. We can't allow that to happen. But in the battle now, in terms of what comes next, the battle space is already shifting now from, say, elections and election equipment, again, which we have to keep our eye on the ball there and locking those gains. But also the battle is now shifting to misinformation and disinformation. Our enemies and adversaries want to sow doubt and discord among the electorate and the American people. We can't allow that to happen. We've got to build in resiliency into our system. So strong civics education is important, and also digital literacy, so that people understand how important it is to not just get their news from one source, but from multiple sources, and really be discerning in the news that they see. But election cybersecurity is absolutely necessary, but it's really not sufficient to counter our enemies and adversaries. So we again have to have a whole, a government, whole nation approach It involves obviously not only government, but the American people. Private sector is important. And we have to make sure that our enemies and adversaries can't sow those seeds of doubt in our system, in our discourse, in our democracy. It really does take a discerning electorate, and we need to do this together.
And sort of briefly, Congressman Gallagher, just to take it back to sort of Congress, is this an area in which you feel optimistic about the possibility of bipartisan legislation? Are you hopeful about that? Is there a real sort of constituency across the aisle, or are you concerned that this might, fall victim to some of the same factors of polarization that has prevented, common sense legislation endorsed by both of you, I believe, from moving forward in the past?
Well, I think at least in two areas, I'm optimistic. When it comes to sort of the unique cyber expertise, as well as, obviously just intelligence that as an intelligence community, intelligence that the federal government has and can share with state and local and tribal and territorial officials in the context of an election, I think that's a bipartisan conversation. And I've supported a variety of Jim's efforts on that regard. And then I think there's broader consensus on the need for enhanced support for civics education in the digital age, right? Where the demands of citizenship, I think, are increasing for all the reasons that Congressman Langevin laid out, as it pertains to the broader debate about elections and kind of in the non-cyber domain and the, sort of the constitutional role of the states versus the federal government. Maybe I'm a little bit more pessimistic, but I think with a lot of things we talked about in the report that are more specialized and cyber focused, I think there is room for bipartisan cooperation. I think what's most remarkable about the cyber debate in general is its bipartisan character in the House. I mean, I think you could have come into any of our commission meetings blindfolded and you wouldn't have known who the Democrats were and the Republicans were. I guess you can't know with taking your blindfold off. There's not like a look for one or the other, but the conversations were very, very bipartisan. And I think Jim and my friendship and partnership is evidence of that.
Congressman Gallagher and Congressman Langevin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for moderating. Great job.